Awesome. Yes, I've got some slides, so let's pop those up. And yeah, let's have a look at what that poll you just shared, Jonathan, might reveal about people and culture. So a new way of thinking and practicing HR, people, culture, learning, and OD reimagined. So yeah, that's Logo Fest going on right there. So competing with David. A little tiny history lesson. I'm sure you're aware of this, but in case you didn't, around HR. We started out as worker welfare, we moved into industrial relations, we became personnel, and it was probably around about that time that I got into line management and I realised what HR personnel at the time was. We morphed into HR around about the sort of 1980s, 90s, depending on where you were. And people and culture has very much become a thing. I see lots of chief people officers and lots of chief HR officers who have relabeled to people and culture. And now probably it's people, well-being, impact and activism. So it's almost looped back to worker welfare. And I think that's a kind of pandemic response. It's a kind of cluster of issues out in the macro world. But the term HR sometimes has a little bit of a derisory feel. We know people abbreviate it to human remains and all that kind of thing. But I'm less hung up on that. But I am hung up on the model that we operate in. This is pretty much how we've been operating since around about the mid-1990s. Dave Ulrich from the University of Michigan created the business partner model, or the three-legged stool, or even the Ulrich model, if you want to call it that, built around shared service enablement of administration and technology, centres of excellence with experts in specialist areas such as mediation, such as pay and reward, such as org design development, learning development, that kind of thing. And then business partners working closely with business leaders to improve outcomes and that dreaded phrase, but we know what it means, human capital solutions. Now, I can remember when a business partner model was introduced in an area that I worked in, and we saw lots of HR advisors who suddenly became business partners. And I think it's fair to say that there are probably as many permutations of what a business partner does as there are permutations of what change and transformation actually means. So that's still kind of the prevailing model that's happened in and around the HR world. Now, as well as writing The Energised Workplace in 2020, what a time to release a book about energy at work when we were all sat in our homes who had previously gone to offices. But prior to that, I wrote a book called Transformational HR. So it's a very nice bookend to David's Transformational Culture book. And it was revised in 2021 as a second edition. And I had a go at remodeling HR at that time, recognising that in 2017, we were in the thick of lots of technological change, lots of adaptations to business models, lots of new unicorns on the scene, lots of contingent workforce areas. And of course, around about 2017, we didn't really have much union unrest at that particular time. So this model was based on trying to create less rigidity within HR, as in three distinct functions, and much more about the services and the outcomes we were looking to deliver, and create a very deliberate space, because transformation seemed to be a very hot topic around about this point in time when people were digitizing, they were changing to different types of business models, as I said. But within that, we didn't want to lose some of the fundamentals like employee relations and great work on things like organisation design and learning and development and pay and reward. So this was an attempt at saying these things are quite intersectional, which is perhaps why sometimes the delivery of HR services in a complex environment could prove to be difficult. Now, did it change the world? No, it didn't. What I do know is there are about 35 organisations who have come to me who have said, yes, we've adopted that model and this is how we work it, lots of different variations on it. So they still have business partner roles, they still have learning and development professionals and so on. But crucially, they created that transformation space. And one of them is a large professional services organisation in the UK and Northern Europe who are very adept at things like data analytics and about predictive change in the world. So that was my attempt then. But since then, I think we've seen quite a lot of convulsive change around the world. I've been doing some research this year around economic systems because I kept thinking to myself, we know that belonging and culture and well-being and kindness and adaptability are really, really important to us. But why does it seem to keep bouncing off the industrial machine of hierarchical dominance and I guess obsessiveness about profit and loss and monetary elements? So I've been looking into economic models, and we are now starting to see more of what can be described as regenerative economic models that are more in tune with planet, that are more in tune with more purpose. And in 2019, the CBI produced a report that said purpose-led businesses outperform those companies who haven't got a strong declaration and a sense of belief in their purpose. So profit and loss is more sort of discernible in those companies. People feel better. And Alex Edmonds, who is a business school professor at London Business School on economics, has done some research on this as well. And he's found that where you shift from shareholder value to stakeholder value and much more of a societal impact on your work, you're a better employer, you attract the highest ranked talent, you are more sustainable in your footprint on the environment, and you do post good results as an indicator of that. So I think these things, I'm not going to unpack them all, but these things are impacting on us probably at the same time. So it's a real kind of cluster bomb effect. Technologies, Beth's already talked about the metaverse and about autonomous technology in the Web3 environment, like blockchain. We've got this sense of purposeful life and connecting to things that matter to us beyond the work we do, agile operating systems, ethics, justice, and regenerative value chains. ESG has become a hugely powerful, I guess, enabler of how a company describes its impact and its prosperity measures, strategic people planning, and then learning new capabilities, which I think is a constant in amongst us right now. So on top of those macro level issues, in 2021, I did a bit of meta research. So I researched a whole load of research because it was getting incredibly confusing for me to try and see what the kind of laser point North Star type direction of travel for us was at that particular time. So I compiled it into a report, and HR Zone produced it in September 21, and we're going to do a new one next year. So there'll be a State of HR 2023. But interestingly, what I wanted to try and decode was, what are people saying about the skills that we need in HR and in leadership? And this is the top 10 that came from that aggregated sense of meta research. And you'll see that performance analytics and value creation is the kind of top level new capability that needs to be really, really strong in both HR and leaders, alongside some very people-centric activities like behavioural science, like experience design. And then reassuringly, some kind of new, I guess, frontiers of skill, like meaning makers, how we can bring that sense of purpose much more strongly into the way that we align, the way we feel about our work, and how we look after the people who are coming to help us do it. So all of this has kind of been mulling around in my mind for quite some time. And the big reveal really is, what could the model be that we could shift to? And here's my sense of it. So I've gone for 4 connecting circles again, but I've slightly changed the domains and then what the roles might look like within HR. Because I think what HR does is that it listens, it interprets, and it builds products. It creates maternity guidance, it delivers pay scales, it helps with mediative justice, as David's talked about. Now, those things might not feel like it, but they're a consumable product of ours. The organisation's people, leaders, teams, etc., use them to do their work. But we need to know how people behave and act and feel and can be interpreted and volatile and channeled. And so that's where the people side of things comes in, all underpinned by effective automated and analog-based processes that all gets wrapped up in a system. I mean, it's kind of like an MBA 101 in a way here. So I've looked at the roles that HR needs to be aligned to, and they don't look like roles that you might recognise now, because we would have psychologists, we would have relationship brokers, we would have systems designers, and we would have product managers working alongside people operations. So I guess I'll just unpack that a little bit more for you. So Is it HR 3.0? Could be, because it's getting ready for Web 3.0, but it's really people and culture 1.0. It is our departure potentially from the sort of HR, I guess you'd say, reputation and mental model into something that is much more about people and culture. But it still needs a great system. It needs superior level products. It needs strong operations, and it needs an enormous amount of science and evidence to help us do that. One of the things I think is really evident now is how much pressure and intensity HR practitioners are experiencing. Massive amount of demand. It's more difficult to recruit. Learning and development gets more intricate. The org design needs to be much more adaptable, almost like on a weekly basis. And we also have to deal with a lot of trauma, a lot of psychological impacts on people that come to us as the people professionals and have some pretty traumatic things to share with us. We've seen Me Too, we've seen Black Lives Matter, we've seen all sorts of, I guess you'd say, sort of toxicity that ends up in individuals coming to us for almost counselling type support. But who looks after the people who are the frontline recipients of that kind of traumatic individual instance? So we absorb an enormous amount of that kind of trauma, but we need some help too. And we either have that with support for us, or we have professional psychologists who can be deployed towards that particular kind of intervention and support. So that's why the model is very different. That's why you might, how do I map my existing team to that? And I think the answer I would give to that is you don't map them. You think about the impact they have and the fact that they will occupy multiple spaces within this model, depending on the kind of work they're doing, project orientation, ongoing business as usual, change and transformation, external stakeholder input, whatever it might be. But to give us a bit of help, here's how I've kind of mapped it from what those roles and domains will do and what they'll create. So as an example, you might be thinking, what does a meaning maker even do? They think about the reason for being for the organization, the purpose, the vision, the model, the narrative, the criteria for success, and the clarity of relationships that they have in order to then create the people proposition, the strategy, the connection to ESG, how it brings equity and inclusion into a much more kind of present and integral part of the people and culture equation, strengthen relationships and so on. So if you're thinking, I'm an OD professional, where do I sit? You'll probably sit as a system designer, but you might not solely be anchored to that domain, because it depends on whether you need to go into discover and reinvent perhaps what the purpose of the organization even is and how its success criteria is developed. But I think the biggest shift is to create product managers, people who can have an intricately focused attention to the things that we produce that are supposedly having the best impact for people and the business in a kind of harmonious exchange, which includes everything like our processes, our value creation mechanisms, our recognition protocols, our well-being, our inclusion, our voice, our activism, and capability maps and talent futures. We need much more acutely evidence-based, but also humanistic elements to our product managers. And then psychologists. So if you've got psychologists within your team now, great. If you haven't, that's a competence I would say we absolutely need to leverage more, both for ourselves and to understand people and the dynamics of relationships. And if you've got analysts within your team, great. But if you haven't, that's another capability we need. We need to show our value. We need to show people value that equates to organizational value at the highest level possible. All supported by brilliant people ops, practice leads who know why they're there, for mediation, for employee relations, and for pay and reward kind of mechanics, and coaches who help people with their careers, their energy, their inclusion, and their sense of belonging to the purpose and culture. So that's a big reveal. I've registered the model as a Creative Commons entity, so it's open for people to use with attribution. And I think if we were to deliver it, it might look like this. You've got a 7-month or potentially 7 quarters based transition from your HR model now to this kind of more comprehensive and progressive evolution, with lots of work streams, lots of dependencies and lots of shifts, but you don't have to do it all at once. So I think there's genuinely something about an iterative program we could create here that could shift HR from where it is to 3.0, and even potentially People and Culture 1.0. And I'll send a PDF copy of this deck over to Jonathan so he can share it with you. So if you've been screenshotting avidly, don't worry, you'll get a PDF of it. And that's it from me. Just to leave you with a little bit of the Star Wars legend, The Mandalorian. I think this is potentially the way that we can model HR into the future. And I'll stop there, and we can see if we've got any questions, Jonathan, around that.